Donald Trump is surging to new heights with the 2024 election less than a month away. Last week, he took the lead in Pennsylvania, and today, he's taking the lead in yet another swing state. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map based on newly released polling averages. To avoid wasting time, I've already filled in all of the solid states for both candidates. Trump takes an early lead with 126 electoral votes to Kay Harris's 97. We're now going to fill in all of the competitive races on this map, starting in Washington, where Kamala Harris leads by 13.7%. She's definitely the favorite to win here, but you have to keep in mind that Joe Biden won Washington by nearly 20 points 4 years ago. It was solid for Biden back then. But today, Washington's only going to be a likely blue state for Harris. Down in Oregon, she's performing even worse. She leads by just 5% in yet another solid blue state from 4 years ago. Next up, in Nevada, this has really become the only swing state that Harris actually has a good chance of winning. If you look at the betting markets today, Trump has become the favorite in Wisconsin and Michigan. He already took the lead in Pennsylvania a few days ago. He's leading in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina as well. Nevada is the only one where Harris still has a very slight advantage. And according to the polling average, she leads by 1.1%. But considering that Joe Biden led by 6 points at this point in 2020 and only won the silver state by 2.4%, it is still unlikely that Harris is going to be able to win Nevada when all the votes are counted. So, on the map, based on polling alone, it's going to be tilt blue. But in reality, I do have Trump on track to win. He'll be the first Republican to win Nevada since 2004. In Arizona, this state has taken a significant shift to the right from where it was 4 years ago. In 2020, it was clear that Joe Biden was going to win. In fact, he led in the polling by nearly 3 points in October of 2020. Today, Trump leads by a 1.4% margin, and if you just look at the spread of polls, it is clear that the former president is the favorite. He is not going to lose Arizona. The only polls that have Harris leading are from some of the most liberal pollsters in the country. Kamala Harris barely ever took a lead in the state, even when she was supposed to lead, surging in mid-August. She led by 0.2% at one point in time, but after that, she's been behind ever since, and Trump generally has been growing his lead. There's no doubt Trump is going to flip Arizona back, and according to the polls, it is tilt red. In neighboring Colorado and New Mexico, we have 2 states that went to Biden by double-digit margins. Now, obviously this time, Kamala Harris is not going to fare as well. She leads by 11% in a Colorado poll, but this is a Democratic internal poll, which means that, in reality, Harris is only leading by just over 7 points. In New Mexico, she leads by 8.5%. The vice president is definitely the favorite in these 2 races, but you see once again, just like in Wisconsin and Oregon, Harris is performing much worse than Biden did in 2020, and it's yet another sign that she is on track to lose this election. Moving on down to Texas, we have a state that heavily underestimated Trump in 2020. In fact, at this point 4 years ago, Texas was essentially a tie based on the polls, but that is not the case this time. Trump leads by 5.4%. That's a pretty commanding advantage, considering he's probably being underestimated again. If you look at the results from 2020, he carried the Lone Star State by nearly 6 points. He's probably going to win it by double that margin next month. Texas is going to be likely red, but based on just the polling, it's going to fall right under that 7-point threshold and will be lean Republican on our map. And then in the 2nd district of Nebraska, which is basically Omaha and its suburbs, KL Harris leads by 10%, so it's going to be likely for the vice president. Moving up now to the Midwest, it's this region that's actually going to decide the election. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are the 3 most important states on this map, just like they were in 2016 and 2020. Kamala Harris has to win all 3 of these states if she wants to get to 270 electoral votes. Meanwhile, all Trump has to do is win any one of these 3. It could be Pennsylvania with its 19 electoral votes, or it could even be Wisconsin, which only has 10. Before we get to those states, we're going to begin in Minnesota, where Kamala Harris leads by 4.7%. This might look good, as Minnesota generally has been very competitive in the last few years, especially in 2016 when the race in the state was decided by just 1.5%. And today, Harris leads by 3 times that margin, but really, Kamala. Harris leading by 4.7% is pretty abysmal. She can't even crack 5% when she's running with the state's literal governor, who was re-elected by a double-digit margin in 2022. Now in 2020, Joe Biden won Minnesota by 7 points, and he wasn't running with anyone influential from Minnesota, because of course, his vice president was Kamala Harris. Even Biden was able to win Minnesota by a likely margin, but today, Kamala Harris isn't even close. So yes, she's probably going to win Minnesota, but definitely not by the margin she needs to. Next up in Wisconsin, Donald Trump is on the verge of taking this state back, according to the polls. Right now, he still is behind by 0.5%, but he leads in 3 of the last 4 polls conducted in the state. There's no doubt that Wisconsin is going to flip red very soon. If you look at the graph, Kamala Harris's lead has been shrinking ever since she peaked last month. And so Trump is almost guaranteed to win Wisconsin. I mean, just look at where Biden was in 2020. 4 years ago, he led by 5.5%, and in the end, he only carried Wisconsin by 0.63%. Today, Kamala Harris leads by just half a percentage point. The polling error is going to get her. There's no way she's going to win Wisconsin, but based on the pure data for the purposes of this map, the state is going to be tilt blue. This is the final battleground state on the map that we're going to fill in favor of the vice president. And returning to the map, we're now going to move on to Michigan. This is the most liberal of all of the swing states. It went to Joe Biden by 2.8% in the last election. None of the 7 battlegrounds voted Democrat by a larger margin. But today, Donald Trump has officially taken the lead in the Wolverine state. He leads by 0.5% after a new Quinnipiac poll shows him ahead by 4. For context, the last poll that Quinnipiac conducted in Michigan less than a month ago had Harris leading by a whopping 5 points. Michigan has shifted significantly to the right, and you can see Trump's recent surge on the graph. He is now officially the favorite, based on the polling data, which has always underestimated him here. Just look at where he was in 2016 and 2020. At this point in 2016, Clinton led by 7 points in the polls. At this point in 2020, Biden led by 6. And so Trump's 0.5% lead in Michigan in October really is quite significant. And so, on our map, the state of Michigan is going to be tilt red, not based on my personal projection, but based on the hard data. And then, in Pennsylvania, this has been talked about as being the deciding state. It's very likely that the winner of Pennsylvania is going to be the one to go on to win the entire election. And once again, we have good news with the Trump camp. He recently took back the lead in the Keystone State. He currently is ahead by 0.2%. If you look at the graph, Pennsylvania's always been close based on the polls. Even before Joe Biden dropped out, it was probably the most competitive state in the entire election. But if you look at where Trump was 4 and 8 years ago, you'll get a much better understanding of just how significant it is that he is leading. In 2016, the polls had Hillary Clinton winning by 9.4% at this point in October. And if you look on the map, I mean, Pennsylvania isn't even blue. Trump actually won Pennsylvania, despite this being what the polls were telling you. And then, in 2020, Biden led by 7 points in the polls. He eventually won the Keystone State by just 1.2. So, the fact that Trump is leading here virtually guarantees his victory next month. And so Pennsylvania is going to be tilt red on our map. And now, to finish off the rest of the Midwest, these aren't going to be very competitive. Trump's obviously going to win Iowa. He's going to win it by 8 to 9 points. But based solely on just the poll that we have, the single poll that we have so far, Trump leads by 4%. This poll is obviously going to be wrong. It also factors in Kennedy, so we're going to have to take this with a huge grain of salt. But just for the purposes of the map, it's going to be lean red. And then Illinois will be a likely state for her, though we don't have too much data from the state thou. In Ohio, Trump leads by a whopping 8 points. This has never happened before. In both 2016 and 2020, the polls said Trump was not going to win. However, in the end, he managed to win the Buckeye State by nearly double digits every single time. And this is the first time where the polls are actually reflecting Trump's dominance in the state. He's probably going to go on and carry Ohio by 10 points or more when all is said and done. Moving up to the Northeast, most of these states are simply going to go to Kamala Harris. However, she's not going to win them by nearly as large of margins as Biden won them by 4 years ago. The best example of this is New York, the state where Harris leads by 13.5 points. You might say this is pretty good, she's winning by double digits. But for context, Joe Biden won the Empire State by 23 points just 4 years ago. We have 3 polls so far from New York. None of them show the vice president winning by a solid margin. And this isn't all that surprising. Before Joe Biden dropped out, he was leading by just single digits in the state. And so New York simply is not as blue as it once was. And this performance by Harris, if she wins by 13.5 points, it would be the worst performance for any Democrat since Michael Dukakis in 1988, as New York has been a solid blue state in every single election since. But today, it is on track to be likely for the Democrats. And then, up in New Hampshire, the vice president leads by 7.4. The Granite State is barely going to be likely blue, but in reality, she's going to win it by a smaller margin. The same story applies in Maine. The polls are overestimating Democrats here as well. Harris is ahead by 11.7 on average, but there's no way she's going to perform better than Joe Biden, who only won Maine by 9 points. And then we also have New Hampshire and Delaware. We don't actually have any polling data from these two states, but Harris is unlikely to win them by more than 15 points. And now, we're left with just 4 states in the Southeast. I mean, Kamala Harris, hypothetically, if she wins these 4 states, she could actually win the election. But we obviously know that is not going to happen. The only state where she stands a chance is Virginia, where she leads by 6.4%. It's okay. She's doing better than she was before, where polling had her ahead by just 2 or 3 points. But these 2 new polls are definitely outliers. Emerson College is a very left-leaning pollster. I'm looking at the 2020 map. Virginia went to Biden by a double-digit margin. Kamala Harris isn't really getting that close. Virginia has shifted right since Biden's election 4 years ago. And today, it's only going to be a lean blue state. Down in North Carolina, this is another swing state where Trump is in the lead. He's ahead by 0.6%. I mean, just look at the spread of polls. Do you really think Kamala Harris can win here? Trump leads in virtually every single one of the last 15 or so polls released. And if you look at the polling from 4 and 8 years ago, they all had Democrats winning, but North Carolina is actually the only swing state that voted for Trump in both 2016 and 2020, as many of them flipped blue in 2020. But North Carolina remained true to Trump, with him winning the state by just over 1%, and today, there's no doubt he's going to win it for a 3rd time in a row. North Carolina is going to remain Republican, and it's going to go to Trump based on the polling by a tilt margin. And then in Georgia, which was the closest state of the 2020 election, Donald Trump today leads by 1.5%, his largest margin in all of the swing states. The new Quinnipiac poll has him ahead by 5 points. Just like North Carolina, look at the polling. Harris leads in just 1 out of the last 12 polls. There's no doubt that she is going to lose the Peach State. She's not going to be able to replicate Biden's success from 4 years ago. Trump has surged in Georgia. She was actually behind for a couple of weeks last month, but there's no doubt that he is the clear favorite once again today. And so Georgia will also be tilt red, but Trump is on track to win by nearly 2 points in the end. States like North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and maybe even Pennsylvania are going to go to Trump by at least 2 to 3 points, maybe even 4 to 5, considering just how much polls have underestimated him in these states in the past. And then finally, in Florida, this is no longer a swing state. It is a red state, just like Texas. Trump is going to win by 6.7% based on the polling. A new New York Times and Siena College poll has him ahead by 14 points. He's probably going to win Florida by around 7 to 10 points when all the votes are counted, and so the Sunshine State is going to be lean red, barely missing out on likely status. And so, that will be it. Trump at 296 electoral votes, Harris at 242. Over the last week, Trump has flipped not just Pennsylvania, but also now Michigan, and he's on track to do the same in Wisconsin as well, potentially even Nevada.